we've got upper extremity, okay, the clavicle and the scapula. So if we're taking a look at that, so the clavicle and scapula, those are those two bones up there in tan. So those are the two bones that we're going to talk about in this unit. Oftentimes the clavicle, we often refer to as the collarbone. You hear that? Okay. One of the more common bones that's broken in our body. Your scapula is your shoulder blades, okay, in the back. Again, these bones are going to move, okay, and help provide structure and support when your shoulder moves. Let's start with the clavicle here. So on the clavicle, okay, we've got two ends. We've got the sternal end, which kind of looks like a bulldozer. Bulldozer here. It's flat on the side. If you're taking a look at your skeleton here, okay, this is going to be the sternal end. It's flat, broad, kind of like a bulldozer running into the sternum. And at the other end, we've got the acromion end. Okay? That's the one that's, okay, it's more kind of like a spoon, kind of like a hook. And this one, it's called the acromion end because it's going to articulate with the acromion process on the scapula, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. The only other landmark we're going to worry about is the conoid tubercle. Conoid tubercle. And this is on the inferior portion of the clavicle. So, if I take a look here, so here's my clavicle. I've got my big runt bulldozer end, that's the sternal end. You got the more like the spoon-shaped end. That's your acromion end. And then here, this is actually a little better to look at. This right here, that's your conoid tubercle. Conoid tubercle. And where this gets important is understanding left from right. So far, the bones we've talked about, there's only one set of them. But here now we start talking about the left and the right side of the body. So your clavicle, when we're trying to figure out which side of the body his bone is, you need three parts. You need something that tells you front from back, or anterior to posterior. You need something that's talking above and below, or superior and inferior. And something to tell you whether it's medial or lateral, okay, side to side. And so with our clavicle there, first of all, the sternal end, okay, it's going to bow out anteriorly. It's going to bow out anteriorly. So again, I've got my clavicle here. Here's my bulldozer end. Okay. It's going to bow out anteriorly. Okay. So this part here is going to be forward. And you should actually be able to feel that on your own collarbone. So I start in the middle here, okay, coming. As I move out to the side, notice it bows out to start and then caves back in as you move laterally. So find that bumpy part, okay, where it bows out. So the sternal end is going to bow out. That's how you tell front from back. It's not going to be like this, because now that sternal end is bowing back. And the sternal end has to bow out forward. Secondly, the conoid tubercle is inferior. This can kind of be a little bit tricky to see. But my conoid tubercle, which is closer to the lateral portion, okay, it's going to be inferior. It's going to be below it. It's going to be underneath. So that conoid tubercle is going to be inferior. And lastly, the sternal end, okay, because sternum, since the sternum is in the middle, the sternal end has to be medial. And if you take a look at your skeleton here, Here's my sternal end. Okay. It's closer to the middle. Okay. It's not going to be like this. Okay. That's the sternal end is going out. Going in, going closer to the sternum. Okay. That's your sternal end. It's going to be more medial. So, again, a question will be on the quiz. Do we have a left or a right clavicle? So I need to hold this, and I would suggest holding it up to your body. So first part, I want to find my sternal end here. I know my sternal end is medial. So it's either going to be here, or it's going to be here. So that's the first part there. Secondly, I know my sternal end bows out. Okay? So it's going to bow out here. So I'm either going to be like this, or like this. Thirdly, I know that conoid tubercle is inferior, below. So I'm looking at it, okay, and here's that bump. Here's that bump there. Okay, it's going to be below. All right, so medial, okay, bowing out, okay, and below. So that means it's going to end up, this is going to be a left clavicle. And when we get between units here, I'm going to give you a little time to take a look at the landmarks. Try that. Try for yourself. See if you can figure out if you have a right or a left. Okay. And if you have questions about it, let Marsha and myself know. We'll help you out there. So make sure you know medial from lateral. Anterior from posterior, superior from inferior. Which side? Next one. Got our scapula. So turn those skeletons to the back. Turn them to the back. Again, this will be for your reference. I'm going to pull them up in the doc cam. Okay, these vertebrae are going to come in handy a little bit later. I want to put them there. Just kind of give you an idea. Because you see the vertebrae, okay, then you see your scapulas. Now this long edge here is closer to your vertebrae. And that's going to be important here in a second. Let's start with the vertebral border. The vertebral border. You could also call it the medial border. Medial is going to be right there. This is the medial border because it's closer to your spine, closer to your midline. Medial border or vertebral border. Closer to your spine. And then we've got a lateral border out here. This will be your lateral border. It's also known as your axillary border. Remember, axillary means armpits. You can call it either or, it doesn't matter to me. So this, you can call it your axillary border or your lateral border. All right, next up, I'm going to flip this to the back side. So this is now looking at it from behind, posterior view. Because a lot more landmarks are on the back side. We'll start up top here. This is the acromion process. Acromion process. The reason it's named as such is because the acromion end of the clavicle articulates with the acromion process. More anteriorly, we got what's called the coracoid process. So acromion process, then we got coracoid. How I like to remember it here is the acromion process. If you take a look at it from the side, notice how the acromion process is above the coracoid process. So therefore, A becomes before C, top before below alphabet. A before C, acromion process above, coracoid process below. Next two, we got angles. Remember, angles are anywhere a bone changes directions. So down here, whoop, changing directions, and Barry Sanders juking them out of their socks. We got an inferior angle. Inferior angle. It's below. Your feet are down this way, down below. That means up top here, we got a superior angle. And the bone changes directions here. So this is going to be your superior angle. Next up, we got the glenoid cavity. Notice, okay, we got our spine here. This is pointing laterally, going out to the side. And the glenoid cavity is important because your upper arm bone, your humerus, articulates with the scapula right here. So glenoid cavity here. And then immediately above the cavity, very small, and then immediately below that cavity, we've got glenoid tubercles. Above is going to be the supra-glenoid tubercle. Below is going to be the infra-glenoid tubercle. So if next week we put a sticker and we put an arrow pointing, okay, that's what it's referring to. Supra-glenoid tubercle, infra-glenoid tubercle. Above and below, again the name gives it away. Next up, the spine. Spine here. This long ridge, we call that the spine. Okay. Just like your spine pokes out the back, the spine of your scapula also pokes out the back, pokes out posteriorly. Next three, fossas. Fossas. Remember, fossa, F, flat. Relatively flat surfaces that we're going to see muscles attached to. We got a fossa that's below our spine, so we call that the infraspinous fossa. Infraspinous fossa. Again, the name gives it away. Infraspinous fossa. Right above your spine, we call that the supraspinous fossa. Supra, above. Superman flies high in the sky. Looking extra fly. Supraspinous fossa. And then, if we flip over to the anterior side, we've got the part of the scapula that's against the ribs. So if you take a look at your skeleton, the part that's against your ribs. That's the subscapular fossa. Think sub as in submarine. If my rib cage is the ocean, oh no, yeah, kind of works. Rib cage is the ocean. Okay? Submarines go below the ocean, okay? But sometimes they have to come up for air. So since your scapula is kind of like a boat, like a submarine on top of the water before it dives down. So subscapular fossa is going to be right here. Lastly, up top here, it's probably more prominent in your plastic bones. We got a scapular notch. You could call it the suprascapular notch if you wanted to. But from all sakes and purposes here, you can just call it the scapular notch. One other thing there, okay, so the glenoid cavity right there. Some people, you'll see in some textbooks, will call this the glenoid fossa. Glenoid fossa. And this is kind of a fun fact, right? You could call it glenoid cavity, glenoid fossa, doesn't matter to me. Questions with the landmarks? we have a left or a right scapula. Now, the nice thing about the scapula, I can notice that there's one part that can take care of top and bottom and front and back. So the busy end, when I say busy, I'm talking about you got the acromion process here, you got your spine, okay? It's big here, chunky, a lot of other stuff is going on here. That side is going to be both posterior and superior. Posterior and superior. So if I'm taking my scapula here, okay, busy end, that's got to be up and it's got to be pointed out the back. So if I'm taking it here, I've got up and back. Now thirdly, we know that that glenoid cavity is medial. So you take a look up here. Okay, your humerus is going to articulate with the glenoid cavity, and your arm is on the outside, it's more lateral to your scapula. So we know that the glenoid cavity needs to point out laterally. So again, I've got busy end superior, it's poking out my back, but if I hold it up to my right side, my glenoid cavity is pointing medially. It's opening up medially. My arm's out here. So that means I know this has to be on the other side. Now it's pointed out. Now my arm can articulate with that glenoid cavity. So right here I would have a left scapula.
So do you want your glenoid cavity pointing medially or laterally?
Laterally. Genetics. I knew I made a mistake there. That's a mistake. That should be lateral. That should be lateral there. So that's pointing laterally. Laterally. I'll make that correction. Yep. I apologize. Glenoid cavity, that's lateral. That's facing lateral. Good catch there. Big note. Joints of the shoulder, or the shoulder girdle there. We've got the sternoclavicular joint. Sternal meaning sternum, clavicular meaning clavicle. So where the sternum and the clavicle meet. Sternoclavicular joint. You can abbreviate it to say SC joint. SC joint. SC joint there. Sternoclavicular joint. At the acromion end, okay, if you get really fancy here, we call it the acromioclavicular joint, or the AC joint. Acromion end, okay, because there's a acromion process, acromion end of the clavicle. Acromioclavicular joint. You can abbreviate that as the AC joint. Now, out of these two joints here, this one is going to get dislocated far more often than the SC joint. AC joint gets dislocated a lot more. Some of you may have already had that. If you take your shoulder here, okay, you come out to the outside and you feel a bony bump at the top, that's your AC joint, right up top there. Likewise, if you come to the middle, okay, find the parts, okay, we don't poke down there, where your throat is. If you move a little to the right and the left, big bony part kind of sticks out, that's your SC joint. This year was the first time that I ever heard of anybody with an SC joint. Most of the time, if you're going to see an SC joint injury, it's something catastrophic like a car crash. AC joint, that happens often. Anytime you're coming down here, you try to brace yourself, you slip, you fall, jolts upward, that's oftentimes where you're going to dislocate the AC joint. Dislocate meaning the bones come apart and stay apart. Fun fact, subluxation means a joint goes apart but comes back together automatically. Dislocation means that they go apart and stay apart. Fun fact. Now, for those joints to stay together, we need some ligaments to hold them together. So first, let's start off with the acromioclavicular ligament. Again, the name gives it away. It's the ligament that holds the acromion process and the clavicle together. So you got that. We've also got the coracoclavicular ligament. Coraco, we're thinking coracoid process, clavicle. So coracoid process of your scapula and your clavicle, they're held together by this ligament. And this ligament specifically is made up of two smaller ligaments. One, in red, is the conoid ligament. That ligament attaches at the conoid tubercle, a little small bump on your clavicle, and it also attaches at the coracoid process. Then we also have the trapezoid ligament in yellow. It's trapezoid because of its shape, four-sided shape there. And that just attaches along the clavicle somewhere, not exactly the conoid tubercle. But then it's going to also attach at the coracoid process. So again, all three of these ligaments, they hold the AC joint together. They hold this joint together. Yes?
Are you going to ask us to differentiate between the conchoid and the trapezoid?
No, I'm not. I would not. So I'm not going to give you a diagram saying, tell me what the trapezoid ligament is, what the conoid ligament is. What you should be familiar with is generally where do they attach the ligaments. Not specific like we did with muscles, generally where they attach. And specifically what joint do they help hold together. So two of these, if you want to count these as separate, all three of these, they hold the AC joint together. They keep it from coming apart. The SC joint, the sternoclavicular joints, again, notice we got a lot more ligaments compared to the AC joints that are by the joints. And that's one reason why the SC joint is much harder to dislocate. In brown on the front, and what's not shown behind, is we got the sternoclavicular ligaments. Sternal meaning sternum, clavicular meaning clavicle. Okay, so one attaches on the front side, that would be the anterior sternoclavicular ligament. The one that's behind, that you can't see, that's the posterior sternoclavicular ligament. So you got those in the front and the back. In green, we got costoclavicular ligament. So the clavicle and costo, remember, means ribs. So in green there, the clavicle and the ribs. Okay, it's a ligament that holds the first rib and the clavicle together, which helps provide support and structure to SC joint. And then in yellow here, the ligament that spans both clavicles is your interclavicular ligament. So wherever you see the word inter, we're thinking between two bones. Specifically, in this case, between two clavicle bones. So again, notice the difference here. These are a lot closer and provide a lot more structure to the SC joint versus over here the AC joint. We only have one that's directly on the AC joint. The other ones are kind of off a little bit here, a little bit farther away. So that's one reason why the SC joint is much more difficult to dislocate. All right, let's talk about the humerus here. Some find it funny, others don't. The humerus is your upper arm bone. Upper arm bone, if you want to take a look generally, this is your upper arm bone here. Now, one thing I want to differentiate going back to last unit, okay, the scapula and the clavicle, they're what make up our shoulder girdle. So if you hear the term shoulder girdle, okay, that's what we're thinking. We're thinking about that joints between the clavicle and your scapulas. When we talk about the shoulder joints, most times we're talking about where the humerus articulates with the scapula. So this is considered more the shoulder joint. Clavicle and scapula, though, they're more considered the shoulder girdle. So let's talk about those landmarks on your humerus. All right, we're going to start top down here. And so just to give you a relation again where it's at, you've got your spine, you've got your scapula, and then you've got your humerus. Starting off at the top here, we call this the head. The head of our humerus. You got a head, that means you've got a neck. And specifically in this case, we got two necks. We call this the anatomical neck. Anatomical neck here. Down here, this is your surgical neck. The reason it's called the surgical neck is this is a common spot where the humerus breaks if you have surgery on it. You got anatomical neck, and you got surgical neck. Now near that, the head there, we've got two important landmarks. They're trochanters. We got this bump here, and this big one here. The big one is the greater trochanter. Oh, sorry, I apologize. Greater tubercle. I'm thinking femur right now. Sorry about that. Tubercle, greater tubercle. Greater tubercle there. This one is smaller, it's the lesser tubercle. One thing you want to point out there, the lesser tubercle is always going to be anterior. Lesser tubercle is always anterior. So feel free to use that. So again, tubercles, not trochanters, my apologies. Greater tubercle, lesser tubercle. Now between the two tubercles, we've got the intertubercle groove. Inter meaning between. Tubercle, you got the tubercle. So between tubercle groove, intertubercle groove. Some people also call this the bicipital groove. And this is where your biceps tendon lays in your body. So it goes through this. Oftentimes, if our biceps tendon is inflamed, okay, it kind of gets pinched here. So some people get discomfort there in their shoulder and the biceps from any injury there. But the intertubercle groove between your greater and your lesser tubercles. Down along the side here. Down along the side, more on the lateral portion. And again, I know this is lateral because my arm is on the outside. Notice my spine is medial, it's on the inside. So more on the lateral portion, we call this the deltoid tuberosity. Deltoid tuberosity. Bump that sticks out on the outside. Deltoid tuberosity. Some of you who lift weights know your deltoids are some of your shoulder muscles. And that's where your three deltoid heads attach. Going down, we got two ridges or crests. You can label them as such. Crests or ridges. And we've got they're called supracondylar ridges. Now, The reason they're called condylar is we've got condyles at the bottom. Remember, condyles are parts of bones that stick out. They're relatively smooth. So supra meaning above. So above condyle ridges. Supracondylar ridges. Supracondylar ridges. Since this one is closer to your spine, that would be the medial supracondylar ridge. Since this one is facing out, this will be your lateral supracondylar ridge. Again, understanding we've got condyles down here. Remember, with condyles, parts that are immediately superior and sticking out the side, we call those epicondyles. So we got an epicondyle here, this bump. We got an epicondyle here, this bump. Since this one's pointing in towards the spine, that's our medial epicondyle. This one's pointing out, so your lateral epicondyle. So again, epicondyle, remember, means immediately superior, immediately above your condyles. Condyles here, epicondyles here. Next three we're going to talk about are the fossas. Fossas. Again, maybe a flat, maybe a little bit indented, concave surfaces. We got three of them here. This bigger one right here. Okay, this one happens to have a hole, might not, may or may not. We call that the coronoid fossa. Coronoid, not conoid, which we talked about last unit. Coronoid fossa. And the reason it's called that is we've got a process on our ulna, one of our bones of our forearms. That process is going to go right here. But we call this the coronoid fossa. Slightly lateral, okay, it's smaller. This is going to be our radial fossa. Radial fossa, which is where our radius pivots. Where radius pivots. Radial fossa. So I flip it to the back. The one lone back landmark we're going to talk about is the olecranon fossa. And like the coronoid fossa, the olecranon fossa articulates with a olecranon process on your ulna, which is part of your forearm. So we call this olecranon fossa. This is always posterior, the one posterior landmark. Last two, we've got two condyles down here. Now, for whatever reason, I'm not sure, they give these condyles specific names. So make sure we know the specific name here. This one here that's rounded, kind of looks more like a head, is your capitulum. Capitulum. They think cap. You wear a baseball cap on your head. Capitulum looks more like a head. Notice it's a lot rounder. That one's more lateral. More medial. And notice this kind of got a flat part. We call that the trochlea. This is the trochlea. The trochlea is more medial. Again, I apologize here. Yeah. These are tubercles up here, not trochanthers. Tubercles. We got greater tubercle, and we got a lesser tubercle. Questions on the landmarks? All right, same thing here. We got to know left from right. So you got your humerus here. Now the nice thing is your head. Okay? Head is always going to be superior and medial, and that is correct. That's correct. The head is superior and medial. Because if you take a look at your skeleton, my head, the ball part, is always going to articulate with the socket or the glenoid cavity of our scapula. So it's got to be superior and it's got to be medial. Superior and medial. So that just leaves us with the anterior and posterior. So the olecranon fossa, the one lone posterior landmark, that's on the back. That's on the posterior side, the back side. So if I'm taking this here, I know my head has to be superior, okay, and point medially. So it can be either here or here. Next thing I'm looking for the olecranon fossa. That's going to be point backwards. So pointing backwards, this doesn't work because now it's pointing out. So right here, I've got a left humerus. You make sure to know whether you have a left or a right. All right, joints here. Just got one joint to talk about. Okay. The glenohumeral joint. Humeral meaning humerus. Gleno meaning the glenoid cavity. Okay. So the glenoid cavity, remember, is on your scapula. Okay. That's where the head of the humerus articulates with. Again, we would call this more of the shoulder joint. Shoulder joint, the true shoulder joint. Glenohumeral joint. And then to hold that in place here, okay, we've got a couple different ligaments. One is the coracohumeral ligament. So humeral meaning humerus, coracal meaning the coracoid process. So that's in green here. The coracoid process, okay, that's one part that sticks out of your scapula. So there's a ligament that goes there, okay, and then attaches on your humerus there. Goes and attaches on the humerus. And then we've got glenohumeral ligaments. Humeral meaning humerus, gleno meaning glenoid cavity. And it's a set of these three ligaments, which you won't have to specify which is which. Okay. They attach on the humerus there and attach also at the glenoid cavity.